Okay, so this is something new. I don't know really what to call it or how to talk about it, or I haven't even necessarily really identified the full purpose of it for myself. But uh, I just want to talk about music stuff. I don't feel like I have anyone in my life that I can have like dedicated conversations with about this kind of stuff, at least currently, and I haven't for a very long time. I've got a mentor that I've been taking lessons with, Robbie Barnby, a YouTuber, and we talk about theory and stuff. But I think beyond that, sort of hour every other week or whatever, I kind of feel musically siloed in a way. So, in a bunch of different ways, I'm kind of reaching out to the world for the first time musically. I've kind of been in my own thing for a long time, just kind of learning and playing. And so I guess this is part of just kind of changing that a little bit. So this particular thing was just an idea like, why don't I sit down and just talk about some stuff, and maybe people will find it, maybe people won't, and if they do, then they'll come out of the woodwork. And if once I've come across some like-minded people, whether that be working together on music or just talking via YouTube comments or Instagram comments or something like that, maybe I can learn something from these people that are kind of thinking the same way that I am or interested in the same things that I am. And maybe I can teach them something, maybe they can teach me something. Just it's sort of an interchange of ideas, and just starting that dialogue, because I feel like I've been complaining about being musically alone for so long, but kind of unwilling to change it, and to sort of fight the I don't know, fight the urge to sort of stay in my comfort zone. So some of this is about kind of fighting my own insecurities as a person and as a musician, and just kind of like putting myself out there. So, without further ado, I've already talked a little bit too much, and I did a take of this earlier. This was like a 33-minute take, so I'm just going to kind of jump into it and try to get through all of this information as quickly as possible. So, obviously, if you're looking at the, maybe the title or the description or whatever, the title is going to probably be something about fourths tuning on the guitar, and so that's probably what you're here to give a shit about. And so yeah, let's just jump right into it. I'll try and get through as much information as I can quickly, but I will also say, especially after doing a take earlier and seeing how long I talked, I have a problem with being concise, but also this is something that is a kind of a serious thing. Like, if you can't listen to somebody talk about it for 30 minutes, you probably shouldn't switch to fourth tuning, right? Because this is something that you're going to be doing for the next tens of thousands of hours with your instrument, right? Like, this is a very serious decision to make, I feel, as a musician, as a guitar player. So it makes sense to talk about it, because it is something that is fairly complicated. And I kind of want to do it justice. So what is fourth tuning? I'm assuming that and I'll say this, if fourth tuning is something that doesn't really make sense to you, probably don't need to be worrying about using it. It should be something that, and I'll talk about this more, but if you're not super familiar with intervals and chords and scales and, scale degrees and things like that, if that kind of stuff scares you, like triad construction, seventh chord construction, things like that, probably not a good idea to switch, because the pros and cons, I feel, are very specific. And when switching to this tuning, you should really understand what you're giving up and what you're gaining. And if you don't understand those things pretty well already, you're probably not in a great position to make that decision for yourself yet. And maybe it should be something that you revisit later. But that's just my opinion. And you should do obviously whatever makes you happy, whatever works for you as a musician. But that's just my recommendation. There's sort of like a level of prerequisite knowledge to really understand like what you're getting and what you're giving up by making the switch. And so that's kind of what I'm here to talk about is why would somebody use it? When did I switch? Why did I switch? How did it go? What are my thoughts? So again, just to recap, and I feel like, again, you should kind of know this, but if you're thinking about using it, force tuning is just a slightly alternated tuning for the guitar. Instead of EADGBE tuning from low to high, it's EADGCF. So the low four strings are the same, and the bottom two, the high two strings, are 1/2 step up from where standard tuning is, just one. If you kind of think of a tab, if you use tabs, you could picture maybe a chord voicing that spans all 6 strings, and then you just take 2 of the high 2 strings and you just move them back 1 fret. And that would be kind of how a chord voicing would be affected, for example. So why would somebody use force tuning? Well, the major third between and again, this is something that if you don't already know this kind of stuff, I'm going to glance over this part a little bit because there's a lot of people that have talked about this. There's a lot of places to find information and inspiration about these ideas. So I kind of expect someone that's seriously thinking about making the switch here to kind of already know this information. So I'll just kind of glance over it a little bit, but the jump, the major third jump, instead of force, everything is tuned in force on a guitar except for this major third interval between the G and the B string. Because of that, it introduces inconsistency on the guitar in terms of pattern shapes and intervals in general. So by eliminating that and sticking to fourths everywhere, you immediately optimize for sort of the physical nature of the instrument and the sort of how well it lends itself to physical pattern-based playing. You kind of triple the value of any pattern that you learn. For example, if I know that this chord shape is a major 7, this is a G major 7 shell voicing based on the 6th string, this chord shape, this physical shape, works everywhere, on every note, on every string, assuming I have enough sort of vertical space to get the voicing out, right? But even simplifying that idea to a simple voicing, something like, let's say A with a major third above it. So we got A, and then we got this C sharp. That's a major third interval. And it doesn't matter what string I play that on, what position I play it in, that's always a major third interval. That physical relationship between these two fingers is always a major third interval. It goes for chords, it goes for scales, everything. Everything becomes consistent everywhere. And that is sort of the key draw. Another sort of quick example of why I said sort of triple your value per pattern, per idea that you learn, you immediately reduce the amount of memorization necessary physically by a factor of 3. And you can see that, for example, in the triad shapes. If you look at triad inversions across the guitar, a 3-note chord only has 3 inversions: root, first inversion, second inversion. And yet there are 3 shapes per inversion on the guitar in standard tuning. So if you wanted to learn all 4 triads, major triad, minor triad, augmented triad, and diminished triad, there are 4 triads. There are 3 inversions of each, so there's 12 inversions. And there's 3 shapes per inversion, so you have to learn, I guess, 36. I could be a little bit off there, but a bunch of inversions. Maybe there's some overlap as well between some of the inversions, but you get the idea. You immediately reduce that by a factor of 3 because the reason that there's 3 shapes per inversion is because of that B, that weird tuning thing. You have a shape for down here when you're playing with without the B kind of mucking things up. You've got one once you've introduced the B where it switches and now everything is brought forward a string. And then you've got this when you're playing on the high string, you've got sort of a new set of shapes. In fourth tuning, there are there's one shape per inversion, and that's it. You learn that one shape, you use it everywhere. So that was the big draw for me. I knew that I was going to play almost entirely sort of improvised music, or sort of play in a way such that I was kind of always thinking about notes and scales and chords and construction and intervals and things like that. And I wanted to be as familiar as possible with all these ideas, and use them actively sort of during my playing, whether or not I really was thinking about them, because a lot of times I don't. People get sort of confused about that with theory, but I just wanted to optimize my knowledge in that regard. So that was why it spoke to me. I switched about 9 months ago now, and it was rough. And that's sort of the reason I'm making the video. Is it is difficult to switch, I feel. For example, I was talking with like I said, my mentor, the person I'm taking lessons with, Robbie Barnby. He mentioned that earlier in his career, he thought about switching. But at that point, he had 13 years of experience playing in standard tuning, and he had so much connection with that tuning and with the ideas that he had discovered in that tuning and the shapes and the patterns and all of that, that it didn't make sense for him to give that up. And I think that that's a common reason why a lot of people that are interested in this tuning don't. Luckily, I got to it. I actually tried to switch 3 or 4 times before I finally did switch. And the first couple of times I found it very awkward and difficult to use. And I didn't quite know enough about theory and intervals and things to make it make sense to actually switch. And I always found reasons to switch back, or I would just try it out for a day or two and, kind of move on. And over time, the more I learned, the more comfortable I got, the more I understood arpeggios and intervals and things like that, the more I convinced myself, like, this weird B thing doesn't make sense, and this tuning makes more sense for my brain, and I really like the idea of force and the pros, and I'm not too afraid of the cons. And so I just did it. I decided one day I told my best friend, I said, I'm going to just never use standard tuning again. And I haven't. It's been 9 months now. And I am fully immersed in force tuning. So I will say it was painful at first. The immediate things I noticed were physical shapes. This immediately exposed all the weaknesses I had as a player, where I was really depending on shapes and the physical nature of the instrument rather than understanding really what I was doing or really playing by ear. One important example of that for me was the Dorian mode. I had this, very often I would play over this sort of 1/4, I would play over that sound with the Dorian mode. And that was a very common thing that my fingers reached for often. And when I made the switch to the new tuning, I immediately lost that. I didn't have sort of a shape that I was very comfortable with, sort of getting that sound and getting that tonality. And it felt like I lost a part of myself as a musician, and it felt like that for a long time. Another example of that same phenomenon was the typical sort of minor 9 jazz chord voicing. I really love that chord. I really love that voicing. I used it a lot in standard. So it would look something like, if I was playing this E minor 9, it would be, 7th fret on the A string, 7 5 7 7. For me, there's a repetition in that minor third interval, and the voicing for me now is 7 5 7 6. I'm still not comfortable with that voicing. So I lost something when I switched to this tuning of, like, these voicings that I love, these positions that I love, these shapes that I love, that I use a lot, that I use frequently, that I commonly reach for and think of as like part of my sound and part of my sort of personality on the instrument, are no longer, they're accessible to me, but they're awkward to me. And the what's there now is not, it doesn't sound good to me in a certain light. And so that sucked. And it took me a long time to not feel negatively about that. And I don't know exactly when it happened. I know that it was a while, maybe 3 to 5 months, where I had these constant sort of pangs of sort of sadness or depression about my playing, and I felt like I had lost a lot of the personality that I once had from some of these things. And eventually it just went away. The more comfortable I got, the more the more it exposed my gaps in knowledge. Like, well, what is that sound that I'm hearing with Dorian? The more I understood why I liked the sound, the more I was able to just play it anyways. And yeah, so after a while, that feeling just kind of went away. And so for me, the things that have been huge pros have been, the consistency with intervals and shapes. I won't harp on it because I've talked a lot about it. That has been awesome. That has skyrocketed my fluency on the instrument. I'm by far at my best now that I ever have been on the instrument, especially for improvising and things like scales and chords and whatnot. Another really important thing that I sort of gained was that all the shapes I knew, even if they were now something different harmonically, they were still valid ideas, because technically any combination of notes is harmonically valid in some context. And so, for example, this is a bad example. I can't think of anything great right this second, but for example, the typical major seventh chord voicing, I think this is actually a drop two voicing, is actually a major 7/11 voicing. I don't particularly like this one. I would probably move that 11 up and make it a major 7 sharp 11. But all the voicings that I knew that were something in standard are now something different. And that immediately is kind of interesting, because you have these sort of physical, things built up in your hand, these chord voicings that you're familiar with, and you're able to take advantage of that. So I liked that a lot. Another thing is quartal harmony, not chordal, but quartal, as in built on fourths instead of built on thirds, becomes like super local. And by which I mean it's very near to you. It's very easy to do. It's very easy to play. For example, if you've ever heard So What by Miles Davis. I'm playing these chords with one finger. It's just fourths stacked on top of each other, which makes sense because it is tuned in fourths, so it's very easy to play fourths. Another example is the chord at the end of the intro section of Chloe by Joe Pass off the album Intercontinental. Is that the correct name? Yeah, I think that's right. That's a quartal chord. Beautiful sounds. For example, sus chords are quartal harmony. You can the sort of typical Lydian major 7 sharp 11 chord. It's technically quartal harmony as well, because, and again, I'm saying it poorly, but quartal harmony. Because quartal harmony can actually be built off of fourths or sharp fourths, as you'll either know or you'll learn as you explore quartal harmony. But you you get a lot of stuff for free here. Chordal stuff just sounds great, kind of chromatically, so that's really cool. You get a lot of stuff for free with that. And also, I don't know if you picked it up, but when I was playing that little Joe Pass tidbit, you get a lot of really cool voicings on these top 4 strings, which of course you can use anywhere on the neck, which is awesome. But you get, in particular with the top 4 strings, you get some voicings that sound just absolutely beautiful, and they basically take one finger barred across the 4 strings with a single other finger fretting some note, and there's so much harmonic richness and shapes and extensions and cool stuff that you can get with just these 2 fingers sort of acting as your bass. It can feel very familiar. It opens a lot of doors, especially with that sort of quartal sound. For example, here's a chord built in all fourths. If I add a finger on this, again, I'm playing on the D, G, C, and F strings. If I add this finger, my second finger, sorry, this is in the way a little bit, but if I add the second finger on the very next fret on the D string, I get a very nice major 6, 9 chord. And with the other 2 fingers now, I can do some sort of neo-soul, whatever you want to call it, style, just extensions, and everything just sounds fantastic. Beautiful chord. If I instead take that same shape and move it up 1 string to the G string, I now have a minor 7 flat 5 chord. This was the Joe Pass thing, so, and he would play a minor 7 flat 5 with I guess I have to think about that one actually. Flat 9 or whatever. But he would play that, and then he would slide it back a single half step, and he would change from that extension to the same note. So now I'm extending a fret up with the pinky instead, and you can pull that pinky up to the original chord, and you get some really cool sort of movement there. So now with that same shape I've got, and that's the whole intro to Chloe, is that idea, right? And you can do that with 2 fingers and some extensions. It's really, really beautiful. Sounds great. You can actually, I still haven't quite figured out the construction of this chord, but you can actually move that finger down, up another string to the C string. I couldn't tell you what this is. I think it's probably an inversion of maybe a augmented triad with like a weird note in the bass or something. I couldn't tell you what it is actually, but great sound. Another nice thing with the same shape, and I'm getting a little too into this shape. I should make a separate thing about this because I've been thinking about this and using it a lot lately, but you can use that shape. If I have A, I don't know if you can hear it, but I put on a freeze. It's a little bit low, but I've got that A ringing out, and I can actually play that same chord voicing I mentioned earlier. Play it again 2 frets up. I can't quite get that, but you get the point. By playing that same shape 2 frets apart like that, you're actually playing like 6 out of the 7 notes of melodic minor over A in this case. So you just you can very easily visualize sort of where melodic minor is. I think that's really useful. So yeah, that's some of the stuff with chordal harmony that's really useful. It makes it sort of like right there. Sorry, I need to get that going. Yeah, so I think that kind of covers the big pros. The consistency. You get to unlock sort of a bunch of chordal harmony stuff. In this case, kind of what I'm playing here is like a That's a G major 7. It's a G major 7 add 6, G major 6 chord, whatever. And you can also you can change the G to an A. And you get this sort of sus chord sound. You can change it to a B as well. You still get a sus chord sound. You change it to an E, kind of a major chord sound. And if you play the original, like a different voicing of that G, couldn't tell you what mode that's evoking or whatever. Sounds really great. You just get a lot of that chordal stuff for free just by sort of learning a little bit, and it's fantastic. Cons: loss of familiar shapes and tonalities. The learning curve and gestation period for me was super long. Like I said, when I switched, I did it cold turkey, and it was like 5 months of pain here and there. The first initial couple of months were super painful. I lost essentially every major 7th chord shape that I had been using for years, and had to sort of revert back to shell voicings because they didn't broach into that C string, so I could just play. I had to basically revert to using a lot of shell voicings because they were still the right voicings, and that actually ended up being very good for me in particular because I learned a lot of new extensions. I learned a lot of new things about shell voicings, including inversions. You should totally check out shell voicing inversions, by the way. And yeah, so it ended up being a good thing for me, but it was painful at first, and it was like I composed a bunch of tunes with sort of these very familiar 7th chord shapes and could no longer play them or had to play them in sort of a strange way. So that's painful. Tabs essentially become kind of not useless, but they become more difficult to use. If you get a hold of like Guitar Pro tabs for like an actual song, whether it's from an artist or something, or someone put something out, you can change the tuning. That's not foolproof though. Sometimes when you change the tuning, things fall off of the, you get that -1 thing going on, if you know what I'm talking about. Or voicings that are already a sort of painful stretch will become basically impossible to play, depending on how wide your stretches are. I actually feel like I've got a pretty decent stretch, something like 6 frets, around the 12th fret. And for me, still super painful in some regards, right? So if you're someone that maybe plays in a church band or a cover band or a wedding band, or you just really like to learn other people's material, if you like to learn Metallica tabs, if you like to learn, whatever songs, and you're trying to use their voicings in the way that they play it, this could be painful for you. And so if you have some dependency in your life on a daily basis of playing other people's material, I would definitely think twice about making the switch. You can still do it. There are people that have done it. I just don't think I would probably be super happy trying to do that. So it's just worth noting, one of the reasons I could do this cold turkey was because I don't have anyone depending on me in any musical context. Like, I don't have to go play for a band. I don't have to go play in, some material that's been pre-written for me and has to be like a very specific thing. I don't have to learn anybody else's stuff. I just kind of do my own thing. So that makes it a lot easier for me. And if you are super into tabs, you just need to think about that because a lot of tabs aren't going to be super useful. Even before switching to from standard tuning, I had developed the ability to play sort of along with tabs, something like Guitar Pro or Songster in real time. And I can still kind of do that in this tuning. I just have this weird part of my brain that's calculating anything up here has to be a fret back now. So there's like this sort of -1 subtraction thing going on in my brain that's kind of translating the tabs. It's not super great though, and it's definitely slowed down my ability to sort of learn from those things. But it is possible, so that's worth noting. And if, of course, you can always get the tabs for something, especially if it's Guitar Pro, for example, and then rework them to work for you in your new tuning if you want. I think it makes a lot more sense, once you're in this tuning, you probably just got to learn by ear at that point. That's kind of the approach I've taken, and it's worked really well for me. And I think this tuning does make it a little bit more simple and consistent to do that. So it's just worth thinking about. And that's really it. Those are the sort of main points. I could talk for a while about a lot of these things, and I probably will at some point. But that's sort of the main chunk of information. Force tuning is an alternate tuning that eliminates tuning inconsistency from the weird major third thing. It makes all of your intervals and scales and shapes and chords and patterns consistent everywhere. It reduces, in a lot of cases, but not all, your rote memorization of nonsense by a factor of 3. Super awesome. It optimizes for sort of your physical connection with the instrument, and it increases the value of everything that you learn and really sort of download into your brain and understand. It gives you nice access to some chordal ideas, and it can help increase your fluency, especially for improvised music. But there's going to be some pain. There's going to be a learning curve, a learning period. I really don't recommend going trying to be ambidextrous. That's just my opinion. Of course, you could do, again, whatever you want to do. I'm not telling anyone what to do or implying that anyone should do or think in the same way that I'm doing. But I do think that if I were to try to and this is why I went cold turkey. I knew that if I tried to play in standard and in force and switch back and forth, it would make things more difficult for me. I was very confident that force tuning, it made sense to me. It was something I wanted to switch to forever. I knew that I understood the pros and cons fairly well, and that I was okay with the cons. They didn't really affect me that much, or I could sort of compensate for them, and that the pros were kind of everything I wanted for my relationship with the instrument. So, think about it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you just want to tell me I'm a fat bitch, also let me know that. Be happy to hear from anyone regardless. Yeah, thank you for watching.